Hello there, Stuart Holman here with the fourth in our series of Growing Disciples daily devotionals in the book of 1Kings. Today we're continuing in 1Kings chapter 8 at the high point of Solomon's reign, and surely one of the high points in the life of the nation of Israel, the dedication of the Jerusalem temple. The grand ceremony that day was marked with prayer and sacrifice and a fellowship meal in which all the people participated. And in this way, the covenant of God with its various signs, all deposited in the ark, that covenant was now linked to the temple at the heart of the people of Israel. And we remember from the earlier part of chapter 8 that when the Ark of the Covenant was installed in the Holy of Holies, the place was filled with the glory of God, representing God's presence now dwelling in the midst of his people as he had been during the Exodus years in the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. And so at this point, God gives great thanks that God has fulfilled all his covenant promises. God's nation are securely in God's place, not just the land, but now in royal Jerusalem. And they're enjoying the blessing of God's rule. And the greatest blessing is God's presence with his people in the temple. And because this is such a grand occasion, Solomon continues to pray. He continues to pray all down to verse 61. And for our reflection today, we're going to consider that great breadth of prayer that Solomon brings on that amazing occasion. The first part of his prayer is for the continuation of the covenant. So verse 22, Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in front of the whole assembly of Israel, spread out his hands toward heaven, and said, Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to your servant David, my father. With your mouth you have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today. Now, Lord, the God of Israel, keep for your servant David, my father, the promises you made to him when you said, You shall never fail to have a successor to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your descendants are careful in all they do to walk before me faithfully, as you have done. And now, God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David, my father, come true. And so, in short, Solomon prays that God would continue to be true to his covenant promises. For the Christian setting out on the journey of prayer, praying God's promises back to him, it's a great place to start. Asking God to be true to his word, it's not an insult to him, but rather it is a God-honouring exercise of faith. We take God at his word. We align ourselves with his stated will, and will rejoice all the more in the fulfilment of his word. So praying the promises of God, as Solomon did, that's a great place to start any prayer. Now, Solomon continues on in his prayer, digging into the wonder of God answering prayer. And so in verse 27 he continues, But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? Solomon's view of prayer begins with the greatness of God. Of course he's not contained by the temple. He's not contained even by the creation he has made. He transcends all with all power and authority. And yet, as it were, he stoops down to hear our prayers and answer them. Solomon continues, Yet give attention to your servant's prayer and his plea for mercy, Lord my God. Hear the cry and the prayer that your servant is praying in your presence this day. May your eyes be open toward this temple night and day, this place of which you said, My name shall be there, so that you will hear the prayer your servant prays toward this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear from heaven, your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. So the temple is to act as a point of address for prayer, not due to any limitation on God's part, as though he'll only hear them there, but because the temple represents his presence with the people. Because God is with us, we pray and he hears. And we notice that at the end of verse 30, that when God hears, Solomon asks that he might forgive. The people will need God's mercy and pardon on so many occasions and in so many ways, which Solomon then proceeds to list in detail. When a neighbour is wronged, when Israel is defeated by an enemy because they've sinned, when there is drought in response to sin, when there is famine, plague, blight, mildew, locusts or grasshoppers, the people are to pray in every circumstance. Whatever disaster or disease may come, and when a prayer or plea is made by anyone among your people Israel, being aware of the afflictions of their own hearts and spreading out their hands toward this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Forgive and act. Deal with everyone according to all they do, since you know their hearts, for you alone know every human heart, so that they will fear you all the time they live in the land you gave our ancestors. So Solomon's understanding of God and his mercy and the nature of prayer, they're all woven together so that ultimately this is a prayer that God's people would really pray. With the temple providing a point of address to God for prayers of all kinds, but Solomon asks that the temple provide that place for prayer, not just for Israel, but actually for all people. So verse 41, as for the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, for they will hear of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm. When they come and pray toward this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your own people Israel, and may know that this house I've built bears your name. Notice the connection between God hearing and acting. If he hears the prayer, of course he'll act. So Solomon prays that all the nations of the world would know the greatness of God, as they also pray and have their prayers answered. This is a prayer that God would glorify his name by answering the prayers of all people. Now, verse 54. When Solomon had finished all these prayers and supplications to the Lord, he rose from before the altar of the Lord, and when he had been kneeling with his hands spread out toward heaven, he stood and blessed the whole assembly of Israel in a loud voice, saying, Praise be to the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us nor forsake us. May he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him, to keep the commands, decrees and laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God and that there is no other. And may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands, as at this time. And so may we enjoy all the blessings of prayer, assured of God's desire to answer our prayers, knowing that we've got a better temple as a point of address for our prayers. If you could ask God for just one thing and know that He heard you and that He would answer, what would it be? What will you ask Him now?